I see that the attendee account is rolling up. So we'll start with some housekeeping and then jump into today's content.
Okay.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started with today's webinar. I'm Allison LaForgia, the managing editor of the content studio at HousingWire. And today our topic is Rethinking Our Approach to Appraisal Quality, hosted by Jaro. A few housekeeping items before we get started with today's content. We very much want today's content to be interactive. If you have any questions for the panelists, you can drop them at any time in the Q&A by using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Today's webinar will be recorded, so if there's any point you want to go back to in the future, you will be getting the recording in your email in the next week. Now, today, our fearless leader is Gareth from Jaro. Gareth, I'll turn things over to you to introduce today's panelists and our content.
Thank you very much. And as she mentioned, I'm Gareth Borchards. I'm the director at Ascent Software Group, which runs the Jaro platform that we have been running since 2018. And we have an appraisal management and appraisal writing and inspection tools that we take to market. With us today, we have Lee Trice, who's the managing director of Option USA, which is an appraisal management company and an appraisal staff firm serving the entire country. We also have Ben Bomero from Foxy AI. He's the CEO and co-founder of that. They build computer vision and artificial intelligence in the market. And we have worked with them quite a bit on doing condition and quality scoring on images. And he's got some good insights on appraisal quality from there. And then we also have Scott Ritter, who needs no introduction, but he's the chief appraiser for Freddie Mac and the director of valuation there for single family. And obviously spends a lot of time on appraisal quality. So to the panelists today, I thought we could get started for our audience and actually just define a little bit of what we mean by appraisal quality, because I think as we get into this, appraisal quality is going to mean different things to different parties. And I would like to start with Lee here and maybe have us start us off with a little bit on what his perspective is as an AMC and as an appraiser, a longtime appraiser himself. And then have Ben do the same, and then Scott from the GSE perspective.
Thanks, Gareth. You're absolutely correct. I would say appraisal quality is definitely in the eye of the beholder. I recently attended a collateral risk network session hosted by Bill Rayburn, and he asked this very question. So he went around the room, and a lot of very experienced, very smart people in the room, and said, what is appraisal quality? And the variety of answers was quite broad. And so at the end of that, Bill kind of offered up his opinion of the definition of appraisal quality, and he offered it through the lens of the lender, because most often that's what we're solving for. We're doing a collateral risk process for a lender, and so for a lender, it is delivering an appraisal report that is credible and enables them to facilitate a loan and avoid repurchase risk. No more, no less, because they're not in the appraisal business, they're in the lending business. And in my business, we see a wide variety of what our customers expect from appraisal quality. So we have customers that prefer kind of just more of a completeness check. They don't really need or want us to get into the integrity of the report. They prefer to do that themselves. And then we have other customers that want us to undertake that and really kind of delve into not just is the report complete, but is it credible? So that's a long-winded way of saying that the definition of quality differs based on the perspective of the person assessing it.
Perfect. Ben?
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for inviting me to be a part of this panel and this webinar. But as a company building artificial intelligence and computer vision models for real estate, when we think about appraisal quality, I think we tend to think about it in a few ways. One is, how can we help collect better ground truth data, preferably in the field when photos are being taken, instead of having to do some of this, after the fact, like we're talking about. Another is, how can we make the data that's collected and used in the report more consistent from one appraiser to the next? And then how can we use AI to help reduce or eliminate unacceptable language or biased language, all without slowing down the process and making it more efficient, and increasing trust for, all the parties that are involved in the process. So yeah, I think that's how we tend to think about, appraisal quality and what that means to us.
All right, thanks. And Scott?
Yeah. Firstly, thanks for the invite today. Very much appreciate joining the panel, and I agree with Lee and Vin. I think there's a few through lines on quality that I think pin and support the entire appraisal process. Vin touched on consistency. I think transparency and a well supported report that gives again the underlying foundation in the development of the report that there's credibility. And I think there's a lot of ways to do that. You and I first talked, Gareth, after a seminar where I heard you touch on some themes we might get into today with how the evolution of trying to monitor appraisal quality and appraisal quality practices historically has been at the end of the process, right? We force make have evolved to the point where the appraiser develops the report, and then there's a lot of focus on the quality tools. And I'm excited to be a part of the discussion to see where we can not only have opportunities to improve the process before completion, integrate technology, and really make a lot of these better tools and tech available to appraisers.
Thanks, Scott. I think that's kind of a key point of what we're talking about here when we say rethink our approach to appraisal quality. When we first started getting into this and doing this on the technology side, as we've built quality control tools, everybody wants us to build these report scanners that look at a report and do things. And quite honestly, after banging my head against the wall many times trying to do that effectively and realizing that it's kind of a whack-a-mole game that you never win, I've always thought to myself, how can we just improve this ahead of time? And I think there's a lot of things going on in the appraisal space right now where there is much more attention on quality with, scanning for bias, scanning for health and safety hazard words, making sure that we've got a much more credible and reliable report from the appraiser. But in addition to all of that, I think, if we could maybe move on to our next question here, Lee, in talking about this, maybe go to you. Because if I go back to the industry as a whole, like the mortgage industry may be the only industry right now that's spending more money on tech, but our cost of origination is actually going up. And as we do that, I ask myself why, and I think it's probably because we're spending money on the wrong parts of the tech there. So, Lee, my question to you on this is, if you were to be able to go back to the drawing board and get your customers to look at this a little bit better, what are some of the things that you would encourage them to take a look at as they rethink their approach to appraisal quality?
Yeah, there are a lot of redundancies and inefficiencies. So let's look at this at the extreme. At the extreme, the current QC process looks something like this. Appraiser produces a report. They may use some QC tools embedded in their appraisal software to do a scan. They send it to the AMC. They deliver it to the AMC. The AMC then does their own quality control process. Maybe they identify a few things that the appraiser missed, and they go back to the appraiser and they get a revision from the appraiser. Now that file's back to the AMC. They've reviewed it again. They've delivered it now to the lender. The lender then QCs it again, perhaps identifies some things that they don't like, goes back to the AMC. From the AMC back to the appraiser, more revisions made, back to the AMC, back to the lender. Incredibly time-consuming and inefficient process with a lot of touches. So let's, for argument's sake, that in the US, we'll say there's a 25% revision rate. So 1 out of 4 files delivered to a lender needs some kind of revision made to them. We have businesses in other countries that's driven that rate down to 1%. I mean, that's a dramatic difference from 25% to 1%. And that requires alignment by all stakeholders to agree on what elements of the report actually contribute to the integrity of the risk management on the collateral side. We've seen wasteful, inefficient revisions come back that could be the period on the end of ink on the lender's name is missing. I mean, that's an extreme example, but it's what I've actually seen. So I think the negative impacts, the productivity and the economics from all this are really underemphasized in the industry. All this time, all these touches, that's money. So all the stakeholders lose money in this situation. Appraisers can produce less because they're retouching 1 out of 4 files. AMCs are retouching 1 out of 4 files. Lenders. And so at the end of the day, it's, more FTEs to get the job done. And borrowers ultimately see an extended approval process. So I definitely agree that the process needs to move away from this reactive whack-a-mole term you used earlier to a proactive approach where all these stakeholders come together with some common interest.
Thanks, Lee. I think that the cost of doing this is really important. In the appraisal industry, we often talk about turn times a lot, of how long it takes to get a report back. But honestly, I see very few people measure that turn time in terms of getting a fully accepted by underwriting report in there. And it doesn't really matter how fast the appraiser turns it in the first time that they touch the report if it requires 3 or 4 sets of revisions, because you don't actually have a report that you can rely on that's ready for underwriting. And all of that extra touching and all that extra stuff just kind of blows out that timeline and the cost in doing that. And, Scott, maybe to you here, I know that the GSEs have quite a few initiatives going on right now around appraisal modernization, improving appraisal quality, and some other things that I think can help lenders with this. Maybe you can touch on a few of those that you have working on, and how you guys see trying to give the industry a little bit more ammunition to get this stuff done ahead of time.
Yeah, it's a great segue. I think you're going to see a lot more thematically, certainly from us this year, in terms of driving towards greater appraiser accountability for their work, in terms of better quality, consistency, and transparency. I think you saw in 2023 a lot more emphasis on words, phrases, problematic language, and we're able to screen and begin to do some level of text detection, word contextualization, and then messaging back through the lender to the appraiser to be aware. I think 2024 and beyond, you're going to see a lot more focus on numbers. And whether we can fully get to a show your work world, I don't know. But you're going to see a lot more focus on market conditions analysis, the need for actually doing the analysis. I saw a question in the chat from a review appraiser, and I couldn't agree more. I think many appraisers do a good job. Many appraisers don't. Many appraisers do not appear, or at least don't report to the reader, that they've done any consideration of market condition analysis, done their research, and developed and supported any associated adjustments. This is where, and I don't have a tool to sell, this is where I think the tech and the tools can really help appraisers a tremendous amount. On a quick look over a week, just scanning around, I think I alone saw 3 dozen market-ready, commercially available tools that appraisers could utilize. And so I think we're going to get to a point where there's going to be much more accountability to appraisers on the work they do, and much more demand for higher consistency of reporting on the quality and condition that all tie to the overall quality that we see in the appraisals.
Thanks, Scott. It's pretty interesting coming, again, from that perspective. And you and I have talked a lot about some of the things that Jaro is doing around trying to help our customers measure and hold appraisers accountable to the results of their report and how that is. I think the FHFA recently, using the UCDP data, published a few findings around market adjustments and time adjustments and how underutilized those are in reports. And it's interesting to me on the time adjustments, particularly because that's actually one of the easiest adjustments that we should be making. And in a lot of cases, it's pretty straight math. Obviously, markets right now are probably a little more up and down, but the tools are out there to make that happen. But appraisers do face quite a bit of challenges. I think around data quality itself and the reliance on MLS data, which has some challenges in and of itself. And I think this is where I ask a question of Vin around this. Ben, you and I have talked quite a bit about trying to build technology to help appraisers with their data, try and help inject better appraisal quality using some of the AI and all that. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the things you guys have worked on and explored around this, and maybe some of the successes around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, more specific to like the appraisal, like on the QC side, or are you just talking about throughout the entire process of the appraisal?
Both.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess as you mentioned earlier, like I guess since we want to talk about appraisal quality throughout the entire process, not just after the fact, maybe we can dive right into that and where like AI and tech is being used today. And in the front end, we talked about in the data collection process, in the middle, the report building process, and then on the back end, which is where you see most of the quality control, happening today. But I think it all starts on the front end with the data collection. And we use computer vision to automatically label photos. We validate that the required photos were taken, and we extract property features. So for example, the computer vision models detect if there are stainless steel appliances in the kitchen or if there's a pool in the backyard. The models detect materials like carpet or hardwood floors, and also identify and highlight possible damages or repairs that might need to be addressed by the appraiser in report. And then all that data is used to pre-fill out forms and check off boxes that were manually checked before. I think that's just like a critical step to getting like better and more consistent ground truth data. And then in the appraisal, writing or building process, AI is being used to score the quality and the condition of the comparables, verifying the design style, both of which greatly speeds up the comp selection process. So instead of having to sift through the listing photos of 20 plus comps, the appraiser can sort by other features like quality and condition to dramatically speed up that process. And we could also compare like the kitchen of the subject property to the kitchen of a comp, for example, to help make adjustments. So not only is that a huge time savings for the appraiser, but we're also helping to choose better comps, which in turn improves the appraisal quality. And then on the back end, in the more traditional quality control process, AI is being used for a variety of things like checking for people in the photos and looking for religious icons, both of which can be automatically blurred or redacted for privacy. And again, just doing like a quick double check as another set of eyes on the quality and condition scores. So those are like a few examples of ways that AI is being used today. As far as like, what's coming in the future for improving appraisal quality, Scott mentioned, some of the technology that's being built around, the language, for example, and I think generative AI is going to play an important role with that. So, we can use generative AI to help the appraiser make adjustments or write comments. We can help write supporting narratives. So, we were just talking about like kind of holding the appraiser accountable a little bit. We can even ask the AI to explain like why this house is a C2Q4, and do it in a way where we actually train the large language models directly on the quality and the condition score definitions, like from the UAD, for example, or on the unacceptable appraisal practice guidelines from Fannie and Freddie, to help make sure that what's being generated stays within those guidelines and definitions. But all that being said, I think it's really important to remember that AI is not perfect. It makes mistakes just like people do. And although it's a tool that's always improving, one thing that's so special about the appraisal space, and that I think is vital to maintain, is to ensure that appraisers who are trained, experienced experts that are passionate about valuations remain in this process of validating the data, the valuation, and putting their stamp of approval on it. So I think the way that we look at it is, at the end of the day, it's to supercharge the appraisers and make them more efficient, make them more accurate and more consistent, not replacing them. So I know that was like a bit long-winded, but wanted to kind of, give like the, our, what we're doing in all these different, phases of the appraisal process, and some of like what we see coming down the road as well.
Thanks, Ben. I think what's important about what I'm taking from what you're saying here too is I think right now in the appraisal space, and Scott, I might ask you here just in a second to talk a little bit about the UAD 2.0 efforts around this, because I think this goes hand in hand with what I'm about to say. But I feel like one of the challenges that I've always seen is somebody that's come into the industry as a kind of a second career type thing. Later on, I looked at how an appraiser does the appraisal, and they fill out a form. And really, filling out a form is not doing an appraisal, right? But part of the standardization process, I think, is put us down this path of kind of filling out this form. But in reality, collecting some of that data and doing that is not where I think we get the most value out of the appraisers, right? It's actually in their analysis. Appraisers shouldn't have to worry about, is this done or not done? They should just be worrying about their analysis. And I think that as technologists, and I think especially with this effort around updating these forms, to kind of remove that element, is that we need to help appraisers understand that for them, it's about doing the analysis, and that their technology can take care of a lot of this, is this done or not, problems that they spend a bunch of their time trying to figure out in there. So Scott, maybe you could, make sure the audience is aware of what's going on around that, and how that might fit into this picture.
Yeah, so amen to that, what you said and what Vin said, because I think that's a big step that appraisers could take, is just embracing the tools and the technology to help. And I get part of the resistance. If you get appraisers that are about my age, yeah, appraisal modernization feels like appraiser elimination. And I think they could continue to see all these advances as just one more push to the margin. And the landscape is changing dramatically, and I get that, and I won't contest that, but I think there's still, to Vince's point, still a place for appraisers throughout the spectrum, and these tools can help. To your point about the new UAD, I think the UAD is going to help tremendously bring transparency and support. As an example, for quality and condition ratings, the appraiser in the new UAD will be able to characterize component parts of the condition rating. So that helps the appraiser. And then you can leverage like the tools, the Freddie Mac LCAR loan collateral advisor can help by checking the consistency of the condition ratings or the condition status of the component parts as reported by the appraiser and return messaging. So I think that's a big through line and an element on consistency. I think taking a step back for UAD 2.0 or the UAD redesign, it in general is going to help bring tremendous clarity to lenders, investors, and borrowers. And the data standard itself is going to be foundational for further modernization. It's really going to help both simplify and enhance the data set. The certifications within that data set are going to be able to customize to what the appraiser did. As an example, now an appraiser pulls up a 1004 Form 70, and you're pretty much locked in to one method to be able to complete that appraisal by virtue of the limitations of the certification. So I think from a practical standpoint, it's going to be great. It's going to allow appraisers to get in and interact with that data set. Now, again, it's going to be a tremendous change for appraisers. For 30 years, we've got this moved down. We pull up the 1004 and we start pounding away. This is going to be interacting with that dynamic data set. But again, I think it's going to really be able to help standardize a lot of the processes and really help advance the industry. I had a question here until he reboots. Who determines specifics of the property being appraised? What about the transparency of the type of data used by artificial intelligence? You back, Gareth?
I'm back. Sorry.
Okay, good deal. We'll tackle that question maybe at the end. But
so I don't know where it coming out. Great to have internet problems on a day like this, but again, I think it's important to look at the appraisal data that's out there, and MLSs, real estate agents, I think, play a vital role in the listing process of homes to make sure that they collect accurate and good data to make sure that they inform that. And I do want to go back a little bit to something you touched on, Scott, in your process on kind of some of the concerns that appraisers have, and maybe pose a question to Lee. Lee, you've been in the appraisal business a really long time. The value centric, your company prior to Option, built out a large staff appraisal firm across the country. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why appraisers maybe should not really be worried about that much, and talk a little bit about how I know Option has looked at their businesses in other places and how they've gone through this transition already in other countries.
Yeah, well, first I want to ask you say I've been in the business a very long time. Are you trying to say I'm old? But or maybe
Yes.
I'm just wise. But
I'll decode that. Yes, he was.
Yes, exactly. So look, changes are going to happen. Changes have been happening, but also, I heard 20 years ago that ABMs were going to make appraisers obsolete. That hasn't happened, and I don't expect it to happen. But in other countries, as Gareth said, a change we have seen is our appraisers can do 4 times the volume with higher quality, lower rework. So lower kickback from the customer. And that's through a much more tech-enabled environment. And that's kind of a mantra that we have adopted, which is tech-enabled services. At the root of it, there's still a human that is a local market expert and a certified professional, but empowered by tech, their ability to do more is greatly enhanced. And so not only is it faster, not only is the quantity of work that can be done greater, but at the end of the day, the quality is also greater because of all the things, we've talked about of VINS technologies and others. So the fun part for us is, we're now entering pilot stage. We've talked about on this call or meeting things we could do or should do, and then we're actually doing them now. So in this pilot, we're using tech that the Ascent Software Group has been building, enhanced by tech that then has and attempting to do or going to do a lot of the things that Scott just referenced. So that will move QC from a reactive element to a proactive element. It will allow us to triage files, and through that data and analysis, we'll know when we need to commit human expertise to the quality process, and when the systems and the tech and the machine learning and the AI has rendered a report that we think can go straight to the customer. So that's a tremendous efficiency right there. And to Scott's point, we can also give a lot more underwriting transparency. We can expose large data sets. We can expose filtering breadcrumbs so that the end user, underwriters, whomever, can see the processes that the appraiser went through in their analysis. We can expose statistical methodologies that were used, of which there is no one silver bullet. It's not like regression fixes everything or any one of the many methodologies, but a blend of those can lead the appraiser to a much more credible and supportable result. So quality becomes embedded in the process. It becomes very frictionless. Quality control moves from being this discrete action that happens separately in a silo to something that happens throughout the entirety of the appraisal process. And Gareth also mentioned form filling, and then we are definitively getting away from that old way of doing things. So the appraiser doesn't see the form during the appraisal process, nor should they. The appraisal process should be form agnostic. Now, the scope of work drives the form. The scope of work from the customer can drive what needs to be done, and therefore the appraiser shouldn't do things that don't need to be done. But we embrace a more holistic look at walking an appraiser through the process through data collection, through market analysis, through approaches to value. And then talked about large language models. That was a great example. Training models to write narrative, while avoiding subjective adjectives, to avoid certain phrases, so that the summary of what was done in the report is much more consistent and concise and compliant. So there is no one thing, computer vision doesn't solve everything. As I said, regression doesn't solve everything. It's really looking at the entirety of the appraisal process and applying best practices of all the technologies and processes available to us to get a great outcome.
Thanks, Lee. I think one thing I would add to that too is as I talk to a lot of appraisers, we get fixated on this idea of fee per report that they do. And I think that we should probably try and convince the industry to move more to a, what's their hourly rate that they're working on these things? Because the things that they're most uniquely qualified to do is where they make the most money. And if we can get them doing those things more often, I think we could increase their hourly rate. If we don't worry about the number of reports that they're completing, but just how much are they able to produce and generate income for themselves, which is another, whole component to this. And I also think, as we've talked about this with technology coming in, trying to do it, one thing that I'm a big proponent of saying is when you need the best, most qualified, most accurate collateral risk report on a property, it's best to use an appraiser. And I think a lot of the other appraisal modernization concepts and other ways that we look at collateral risk is when we don't necessarily need to be that accurate. But I would also encourage appraisers out there to understand that when they are engaged, that their job is to provide the most accurate collateral risk report that's out there. And if they're not going to perform better than the ABMs, then that's when they're going to have these challenges against that. And I think that there's a lot more that we can do to make sure that their reports are more accurate and better. And I'd like to go back and just maybe ask Ben a little bit here, because I think that, some of the questions we're getting in the chat and things here is around AI. And I think as we use technology, there's always this concern around, who's training these models and are we introducing bias and some of that stuff. And I think that there's some pretty reasonable things that we can do. It's an evolving industry, but maybe as the expert here on this, talk a little bit about how we can be assured that AI will not introduce more, but actually reduce some of the concerns that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did see some of the questions. I wanted to address some of those. And, particularly around like data quality and the data that goes into building AI models, which is, it's vital. And, coming back to something I said earlier, where appraisal is in a unique position where we have a person in the loop that's going to the property and that's collecting this data. And I do think that needs to be, a trusted person. I don't think it should be like the homeowner that's taking these photos, but an agent or the appraiser or a trainee who's collecting the data. We have eyes on that data. So anything that our AI maybe incorrectly labels can be corrected to continuously improve those models. We don't view this as some kind of like autonomous system that just is like happening in the background. You don't know what's going on, and then like voila, there's all this data and like evaluation. I think it's also important to like kind of remember that like this is your report. It's the appraiser's report. And for example, if we're scoring the quality and the condition of the property, like the appraiser doesn't have to use the scores that we provide if they disagree. Like they can correct that, and they should correct that, which again in turn improves the models in the future. So at the end of the day, like it's their decision to use some of this data, use the scores or change them, or to use a narrative that's written by AI, or to edit that. Because it's their signature that goes on the report at the end of the day, and you have to make sure that the data that's in that report is accurate. So hopefully that like answers some of those questions about like the data that's going into these models and just how they are continuously improved over time.
Thanks, Ben. I think I would add to that a little bit too, just from my experience of building some of these quality tools that we try and build. Appraisers themselves, a lot of appraisers have kind of canned comments and already kind of pre-built models for some of the comments they're going to put in the report. And I'll tell you the number of times that we find that they made a copy and paste error from those things, and how they've done that is pretty astronomical. And I think that, again, to your point, like, the appraiser is still responsible to verify that everything that goes into that report is something that they agree with, right? That supports with their conclusion. And the goal of a technology company is not to make the decisions for the appraiser. It's to make it so that they can get to that decision faster. Lee and I always use a sports analogy here, where technology's goal is to get them on the goal line, and then they have to take it across and actually get it in there. And because honestly, if we could do it 100% accurately with the technology, then we wouldn't need the appraiser to do that. And we know that we can't do that. And so technology's job is to assist them and do that. Maybe circling back to this, our theme here of, okay, so we've talked about ways that we can improve this. I think there's a lot coming in from a technology perspective of how we do this. Maybe we could just circle back, and before we open and answer maybe some of the questions from the group here, I'd like us to just finish by talking about what are some suggestions that we have to lenders. Like, what can lenders do right now to make sure that they engage in a better appraisal quality process from the get-go, rather than investing in just checking at the end? And maybe I'd give that question to Scott first, if you could.
Yeah, sure. No problem. I would say, I would encourage, if it's to lenders, I would encourage lenders to promote to their appraisers to utilize many of the tools that are out there. Utilize them to help with the increased focus and demand that we're going to have on seeing the market conditions analysis done, and the supported adjustments coming from any market conditions change, aka time adjustment. And it's been a long time since I've been in the field, but there are a lot of really slick tools out there that can help appraisers. So we're not promoting any one of them. I would just say that would be a way that you could, for an appraiser, bring a lot less pain to your life. That would be one tip to the lenders. And another thing that lenders really already are doing to some degree is they utilize our tool, LCA, our loan collateral advisor, to really work with the messaging that we already provide to ensure that they can focus on appraisal quality and potential risk. We've got a base API in the PDR space, which also provides feedback messaging to help lenders. So very high level, I would just say in the current environment, I would utilize the tools, ensure that we're being a good partner with you and providing as much information as we can, and knowing certainly that Freddie Mac, we're going to keep our eye on this. And again, I think the overall theme is increased accountability, and I think you're going to see it on a lot of the developmental and quality items that underpin appraisals.
Thanks, Scott. And I'm surprised you didn't mention the appraiser independence, in there a little bit. But I think that one of the things that I would just call out, in addition to what you're doing there, and you're mentioning it as appraiser quality, but I think one thing that we haven't really talked about in terms of improving this is making sure that the assignment goes to the right appraiser at the outstart of this. And, Lee, this is something you and I have talked quite a bit about. Maybe in addition to whatever other thoughts you have there, you could address a little bit, the importance of vendor selection as they go through and get these orders assigned.
It's right now it's of paramount importance, but let me twist that conversation a little bit, because one thing that I find a little disappointing is panel management has been used as the solution. And so by that, we mean everyone's trying to assign a job to the best appraiser. So let's just assume that some subset of appraisers in the entirety of the universe of appraisers are the best, which also means we're engaging in avoidance of those who are not the best. In a very busy market like we had years ago, guess what? When the best are beyond capacity, that starts to trickle down to the least best. Terrible phrase to use. That's effective But to me, it doesn't solve the root problem. And the root problem is what Scott just mentioned, which is we need to lift the entire industry. We need to empower and train people with better tools and processes instead of just trying to funnel work to the minority who consistently do a great job on their own. And so, that's what I'm focused on. I'm focused on training so we get consistency of processes, understanding of methodologies, devices that accomplish or can enable the tech we want our appraisers to use, and really tackling this holistically. So I don't want to just rely. I mean, it's still important to always engage the best appraiser, but let's make the pool of best appraisers dramatically larger through tech and training and tools. So that would be my twist to that, Gareth.
Thanks, Lee. And I think to that, I mean, we had a question here about, who chooses the appraiser and, how do we do that? And I think competency is another thing that's big here. And I also think that we could have a whole separate conversation of other initiatives like PAREA, the appraiser diversity initiatives and things like that to bring more people into the industry and doing that. And one of the things that I think is great about large staff firms like the one you run, Lee, is the ability to take on trainees and to bring more people into the industry. And I think that, if there was a call that I think is more important than all of the ones out there, is the ability to get appraisers licensed easier across the board in all the different states, because up until we can get better at bringing more people into the industry and giving them the tools from the outset, this problem is only going to get harder to do this. And as as an industry that still relies on these appraisers, we also have to figure out how to bring more of them in and to deliver that. And I also think, to the vendor management side of things, right? Understanding exactly where the appraiser independence sits in the lending institution, because I think there's a big misconception in terms of who shouldn't be talking to it. And I also see a lot of lenders not really take an active role in the appraisal process with their non-restricted parties. And I think it's important for lenders to understand that, engagement with the appraisal management companies and engagement with the appraisers can be had as long as they're, from the non-restricted parties. And there's some very clear guidelines that we can still follow that I think will get to a better outcome on the reports. And I think the VA has a pretty good process around this to help with potentially, reducing some of those. Vin, maybe just to finish with you here in terms of, going back to, again, how can we help lenders? Maybe talk a little bit about, in the meantime, maybe some of the QC things they could be doing, or anything else that you might want to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think just getting back to your original question, I think I would really echo, some of what Scott said, just to use the technology that's available today, right? Scott, I think you said there were like 3 dozen, different platforms that are trying to do, similar things. I know real estate and the appraisal world can tend to be, slower to adopt new tech, but I think, use what's out there today to help speed up the process. Like, we're not looking for perfect, right? But use what's out there to help speed up the process so that appraisers can spend their time and focus on the quality of the data and producing the highest quality appraisal report, and ultimately the best possible valuation that delivers like the lowest risk to the lender. So yeah, I mean, I think that's just how I think about it.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. As we go through and look at some of the questions that are coming in, I think a lot of what we're getting into with some of these questions is around some of the specifics of how we can do this. And one of these questions prompted one other thought that I had that I'd like to finish with, and then maybe we'll go around one more time and let people give any closing thoughts that they might have here. But one comment that came in, or a question, was around the appraisal management companies and getting them to use some modern tools and doing things. One of the things I think that the industry needs to be aware of is that right now it's very difficult on the AMC and even the appraiser side to understand and be able to address all the different investor requirements. We have Scott here from Freddie Mac, and they've got their selling guide and they've got their, the things that they need there, but they're not the only investor in the market. And a lot of times, depending on where that loan may be going, some of these lenders just kind of include all of the extra little underwriting requirements that they've got from every investor in their entire guide. And the appraisers kind of spent building a much bigger report than they may need to, because there's things that one investor needs that it doesn't, the other one doesn't. We're just kind of underwriting to the least common denominator, which is a bit of a cost increase, I think, in the industry. But I do think that, like, this entire conversation again comes back to this concept of we are very reactive. And I would just close with some of my thoughts that from a technology perspective, the more you use it as a proactive approach, the better outcome you can drive, because you're able to utilize those tools to get to the best outcome, the best answer, whatever it is, earlier on in the process with a more accurate value or report than you would otherwise. And if we keep spending time looking at this as just kind of a reactive thing, we're going to keep running into problems. That's kind of my big message here. And I think, Lee, why don't you share some final thoughts with us, and then we'll go to Scott.
No, I don't disagree. It's like the analogy of using preventive medicine. We have phenomenal hospitals and doctors, but you just never want to be there. Avoiding the illness is better than treating the illness. So right now we're treating it, and it's all solvable. And one thing I've noticed in our industry, and I don't think it's unique to appraising, is the power of inertia. The way things have always been done tends to be the way things continue to be done until something knocks that off its base. And I think we're there, because as we discussed early, there is a financial cost to all this for everybody, and appraisers, lenders. We're all trying to earn an honest dollar. So if we can get a better outcome in a more efficient way and expend less labor and money to do it, that's a clear win. And the industry needs that. A lot of these are low margin businesses. So that's what I think we need to work on. I think we need to get alignment from the lenders, appraisal management companies, and appraisers producing the reports. And of course, the GSEs are really trying to push modernization. So I applaud them for saying that the status quo has not been good enough, and we need to look at better mousetraps. So I think we need to continue to do that.
Scott?
Yeah, I think there's lots of points of intersection here. I think Lee brought up a lot of great topics. At Freddie Mac, we are first and foremost in the risk management business. So everything we drive from the top down is through the view of managing risk to Freddie Mac, from the suite of product selections, from the eligibility messaging, which really drives that product fit, and then to this discussion, maybe broadly, where the appraiser fits. So if we have a low risk loan in an area where we have a lot of data that's actively traded, and our models and submodels can inform risk on that deal, we likely don't need to stand in the line for a full 1004 Form 70 appraisal for that loan. So we've got appraiser capacity we have our eye on. You talked about sort of new blood into the industry, either through just new appraisers, trainees, working on the important diversity issue. So I would say appraisers in general, and I think quality in general, will improve by a more data-driven process going forward, and the focus on what that looks like from a quality perspective in terms of building the report from the data out. And a lot of appraisers have gotten used to doing it the other way. They look at a mountain of data and they pick 3 or 4 comps, and then they do a little adjustment with very little support typically, and then there's an output. That report is likely doomed to wind up in that second touch environment that Lee described early on, because it's going to tie back to larger data, which now a lot of people have their hands on, that there's not going to be that consistent through line that report is very transparent or well supported. So there'll be some themes along those lines in terms of, what that looks like, again, in the greater appraiser accountability for quality. And then I think we touched on the other big one, which I'm really very excited about and bullish about, which is the UAD 2.0, the redesign and that entire data set in data standard, which will really be foundational, and it'll also bring a lot more transparency and consistency to the process.
Thanks, Scott. And before we go to Vin, I would just add on that the piece on the UAD 2.0, and I'm a big fan of the UPD, the Universal Property Data Set, and the PDC and PDR products that Fannie and Freddie have brought in here, because again, it's improving the data collection that we're doing in the process, right? And the better data that we're collecting, the more we can do with that data, and the more that we can get those results. And I think that it's on us as technologists to make sure that we're building technology to make it to where we're doing more with, again, less time. And I think, speaking for our particular data collection app that we just got approval from the GSEs last week, we're able to generate an entire floor plan on a 3,000 square foot home in, less than 20 minutes with all the data collection and everything that's required for that. And, when we can do those types of things in lightning speed, or just as fast as a traditional appraisal, but actually collect more data and more accurate data, and then run that through vision models that even augment that data even more. There's so much more that we can do as an industry in there. And then I just ask you, maybe touch on a little bit of futuristic too, and where AI can go, and maybe encourage people to be a little less timid about that, and making sure that we're pushing some of the boundaries of what technology can do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as far as where the tech is going, I think at least for what we built so far, a lot of it has been a heavy focus on, the vision side, the computer vision side, and, the data that we can extract from the property photos. That is now, starting to morph into, not just the photos themselves, but, what kind of textual data can we mine from, from listings, and how can we help support the appraiser in whether it's writing comments or, again, supporting narratives, and do it in a way like I know, I've seen, appraisers, comments in forums in different places where, they do seem to be using ChatGPT or other similar services to, help them, write, parts of their report, which is, I think is fantastic. But at the same time, like there are no, let's say, guardrails around, fair housing laws or, Fannie and Freddie guidelines that are built into, ChatGPT. So, building, models that are very similar, but, have been, trained, like I mentioned, on some of this data to, help keep the train on the tracks there, I think is really important. And I think, that's going to be a lot of the direction that things start to go in. But, to your point, Gareth, like, I think it's all about just helping to speed up the process, helping to collect better ground truth data. And that's going to translate to, I think, all aspects of like the real estate world. It's not just appraisers that need good data, but it's investors, and it's the data that's on MLS. Like, the better data that everybody has, then the better decisions that can be made around properties. So I think that's kind of some of the direction that I think things are going. And I just wanted to add a comment, and getting back to your original question about lenders and what people can start doing today. I would echo some of what Scott said earlier, which is just to adopt the technology that's out there today to help speed up the process, so that appraisers can spend their time and focus on the quality of the data and producing like the highest quality report, and ultimately the best possible evaluation.
Thanks, Ben. And I think, to just close on that, there is, With the AI and everything there, I think what people need to understand is that data collection, because of technology, is going to become easier, better, more verifiable, and less of a highly qualified skill that's needed in the marketplace. What we're going to need a lot more of in terms of the future of work for the humans in this aspect is the analyzing of data. A lot of other industries have already moved to that pace. They understand that data quality is there. It's kind of table stakes already, and they're spending a lot more time and money on the data analysis part. But appraising is not quite there yet. But now that we are seeing this technology come into place and we're starting to use it, and the cost of developing it is at a place where it makes sense for this industry, I think that everyone that works here needs to understand that it's going to be very important for us to understand where we're providing the most value in the industry, both as technologists and as appraisers, as lenders, underwriters, whatever it is. Our job is to analyze and direct how this stuff gets used. And the more that we focus again on that proactive approach and making sure that we're taking this holistic look at the entire process, rather than banging our heads against the wall trying to get every loan to go through the same 1004 74. I think we're going to find that the appraisal industry is going to become a much bigger value add as we continue to go through things. And hopefully what I'd love to see it get into is much more of a reliance in a lot more of the new initiatives that we're doing in lending to bring more housing to people, and helping to make sure that we're understanding things like climate risk and other things that go into collateral risk beyond just the value at a point in time of that home. I think with that, I think we've had a pretty good webinar here, and really appreciate everyone's time today. I just want to say thank you again to Lee. If you're looking for a great AMC or great appraisers, I'd encourage you to reach out to Option USA there. And Ben and his team have built some fantastic AI tools that are implementable in a lot of variety things there. And again, I'd say reach out to them at Foxy AI. And Scott, really thank you for coming on and joining this. I always appreciate our conversations together of where we think the industry is going. And obviously, there's quite a bit of information around appraisal modernization on their website and other things that you can do there. And Scott seems to be at almost every conference peddling these messages and helping the industry learn. So really appreciate that. And thanks for joining me, guys, on this call. And with that, I'll give it back to Allison.
Thank you. And once again, Gareth, thank you for also leading today's conversation. Scott, Lee, Ben, today was full of insights. I know our audience had a bunch of questions in the chat and in the Q&A. So really appreciate you taking us through all this information. To our audience, thank you for joining us today. We will be sending the recording out to all registrants in the next week. The recording will also be available on our events page, housingwire.com/events. Thank you for joining us today. Hopefully we'll see you all again soon.